The absolute and irreversible cessation of our being is what we call death, a concept so profoundly terrifying that a majority of individuals instinctively suppress any contemplation of it. For certain people, the sheer terror stems not necessarily from the cessation of existence itself, but rather from the agony anticipating it, or the tragic loss of those held dear. Although you navigate a completely distinct path, filled with highly individualized experiences, every single person is inextricably bound by this shared, inescapable destiny. Ultimately, mortality greets each of us with a grin, leaving you with no alternative but to return the gesture in quiet acceptance. One might intuitively consider our demise to be inherently negative, solely because it strips away our ongoing vitality. When defining this end as an eternal state devoid of any conscious continuation, the dilemma warrants intense scrutiny, even from those who hold faith in an existence beyond the grave, considering that your perspective on everlasting life fundamentally relies upon your foundational views regarding mortality. Should passing away be deemed a misfortune, it is primarily due to its capacity to abruptly sever all the beautiful moments and joys that our earthly journey encompasses. Through such a lens, our worldly tenure remains deeply valuable, regardless of the inevitable hardships we endure, suggesting that an extended duration on this planet is generally preferable. The true essence of a meaningful existence encompasses every single aspect of reality that you find appealing and deeply fulfilling. Our appreciation for breathing does not stem merely from sustaining basic biological functions, as most would concede that perishing instantly yields the exact same consequence as slipping into a permanent coma that concludes in expiration without ever regaining awareness. Consequently, accumulating more time is beneficial strictly under the condition that you remain sentient and possess the capacity to engage in positive, enriching encounters. Whenever you label the end of life as a tragic event, it is strictly due to the deprivation of future possibilities, not because floating in a void of non-existence is inherently painful. Passing away is lamented specifically because it obliterates deeply coveted worldly treasures. This fascinating conundrum naturally prompts a pivotal inquiry. What would happen if your lifespan stretched out without any boundaries? Provided with a virtually infinite reservoir of tomorrows, humanity would likely succumb to a profound, pervasive apathy across society. Possessing boundless temporal resources would entirely erase any pressing drive to accomplish monumental ambitions, drastically reducing your motivation to maximize the potential of each passing dawn, which could ultimately transform our species into a deeply unfulfilled collective. Ironically, the looming shadow of mortality is precisely the catalyst that infuses our waking hours with immense value, forcing you to ponder whether the fear of this final curtain is truly justified. The prominent American philosopher Thomas Nagel highlights a pair of frequent logical fallacies regarding our understanding of this ultimate conclusion. His initial critique focuses on the stark disparity in how you perceive the void following your passing compared to the emptiness preceding your conception. Prior to your arrival in this world, you were entirely absent from reality, yet practically nobody perceives that historical blankness as a tragic deprivation. One might argue that since reflecting upon the endless eons before your birth causes no emotional distress, harboring terror toward your demise is fundamentally illogical, given that the grave is essentially a symmetrical reflection of that initial, primeval nothingness. Such reasoning nevertheless crumbles upon closer philosophical inspection. Although it is factually accurate that the epochs preceding your genesis and the eras succeeding your demise both represent periods of your total absence, the latter timeline constitutes a direct theft of potential experiences. That future era represents a tangible stretch of reality where, assuming you had evaded the grave, you would still be actively breathing and participating in the cosmos. Conversely, the moment of your arrival does not simultaneously rob you of any ongoing vitality. The epochs leading up to your delivery are not stolen from you, by the mere act of being born, meaning your pre-birth absence cannot logically be equated to your post-death void. The second major misconception revolves around the root causes generating our profound dread of expiration. Observers frequently argue that individuals resisting their mortality mistakenly attempt to simulate the sensation of being deceased, which cultivates a false belief that the afterlife is an enigmatic and nightmarish realm awaiting them. Attempting such a visualization represents a logical paradox, as you cannot possibly conjure imagery or feelings once your cognitive architecture has permanently ceased functioning. Individuals burdened by this specific anxiety incorrectly interpret the grave as a state of active awareness. While you can effortlessly picture your physical shell from an external vantage point, actually experiencing that nullification is an absolute impossibility. A significant philosophical hurdle arises when attempting to attribute the tragedy of passing away to any specific victim. Ambiguity clouds both the identity of the sufferer and the precise chronological moment this suffering supposedly takes place. A paradox eloquently captured by Epicurus. He proposed that mortality should not trouble you, for while you are present, the end is absent, and upon its arrival, you have already vanished. Because a breathing entity has not yet perished, and a deceased entity no longer holds presence, there is technically no intersection where the tragedy actually afflicts the individual. Consequently, the only rational apprehension you should harbor involves the physical suffering preceding your final breath, indicating that your terror should be directed toward the grueling process of perishing rather than the actual state of non-being. Ernest Becker, the esteemed creator of The Denial of Death, received a devastating colon cancer diagnosis and passed away just 2 years later at the age of 49. His groundbreaking manuscript subsequently earned him the Pulitzer Prize after his passing, catapulting his brilliant theories into the broader public consciousness. His central thesis posits that you are thrust into an inherently intimidating universe where your primary psychological driver becomes an instinctual necessity to manage foundational anxieties and willfully reject the horrifying reality of your impending end. He eloquently summarized this dread as the profound horror of materializing from the void, acquiring a distinct identity, profound emotional depths, and a desperate craving for continuous self-actualization, only to inevitably face total obliteration. Because this existential panic is so paralyzing, humanity unconsciously collaborates to bury it deep within our psyches. Your initial psychological fortress against the agonizing realization of your ultimate vulnerability manifests as a fabricated, protective persona, constructed meticulously from early childhood. A young mind absorbs authority from towering parental figures, forging an identity based on absorbing these seemingly immortal traits, operating under the subconscious delusion that emulating an invincible creator will somehow grant immunity from the grave. This is a quest for monumental endurance that Becker labeled as cosmic significance. This phenomenon beautifully encapsulates our heartbreaking burden. You feel compelled to ruthlessly validate your supreme importance within the cosmos, striving to embody heroism and leave an unparalleled legacy to prove your paramount worth. Ultimately, the pursuit of legendary status forms the very core of our social fabric, as our biological self-centeredness merges with an insatiable hunger for validation, forging a creature whose very survival depends on feeling universally indispensable. To shield ourselves from uncertainty, you and I construct a psychological barricade known as character armor, creating an illusion of a completely controllable universe. However, this manufactured safety exacts a tremendous toll, causing genuine vitality to slip away as we cower behind these self-imposed emotional walls. The profound paradox of our condition lies in our desperate craving to escape the dread of obliteration, yet the very act of living triggers this terror, forcing you to recoil from fully experiencing your existence. As a secondary bulwark against our inherent vulnerability, civilization constructs an elaborate hero system, offering the comforting delusion that you can conquer mortality by contributing to enduring legacies. We pursue a counterfeit eternity by dedicating our energies to raising offspring, amassing wealth, or authoring literary works. Because conquering our ultimate demise through valiant deeds becomes the central mission of our existence, every culture inherently supplies an intricate, underlying symbolic framework that functions much like a hidden religion. Consequently, our personal quests for eternal significance often clash, transforming into ideological battles where one person's divine project directly opposes your own deeply held immortality project. It is fundamentally profound egotism that drives soldiers straight into lethal combat, as each individual harbors a secret conviction of personal invulnerability, pitying only their fallen comrades. To counteract this dangerous delusion, you are urged to actively meditate on your inevitable end, because embracing your mortality shatters these psychological shields and empowers you to consciously endure the underlying horror of existence. This deliberate confrontation defines the path of the existential hero, standing in stark contrast to the ordinary strategy of denial. Rather than taking refuge in comforting fabrications, this courageous figure directly acknowledges their own frailty and ultimate powerlessness. By continuously maintaining an acute awareness of their fleeting nature, this remarkable person faces a profound crossroad, forced either to succumb to total despair or to embrace a courageous leap of faith. Ultimately, you cannot endure your own profound insignificance without transmuting that smallness into immense, overarching meaningfulness on the grandest conceivable scale. Nevertheless, acknowledging this desperate thirst for grand validation remains incredibly difficult, prompting you to mask your inner turmoil by accumulating financial wealth as a private metric of your supposedly epic value. Untangling the specific actions you perform merely to secure this fleeting sense of valor constitutes the most critical introspective challenge you will ever face. Conversely, the ancient Stoics entirely rejected this pervasive dread surrounding our ultimate demise. These thinkers viewed passing away as a fundamental biological mechanism that warrants absolutely no trepidation. To reinforce this acceptance, they regularly engaged in memento mori, a deliberate meditation on the unavoidable reality that every single one of us must eventually perish. As Marcus Aurelius powerfully commanded, you must imagine your existence has already concluded, taking whatever borrowed time remains and executing it with absolute virtue. Paradoxically, it is this profound acceptance of our impermanence that actually grants you the freedom to engage with reality completely. True terror, therefore, should not stem from the cessation of breath, but rather from the tragic failure to ever genuinely initiate your journey. Within the Stoic framework, the end of our days never induces paralyzing panic, but is instead welcomed as a harmonious element of the universal order. Epictetus perfectly encapsulated this serene mindset when he remarked that, since his demise was guaranteed, he would simply eat his midday meal if the hour called for it, entirely willing to address the act of perishing whenever it formally presented itself. By treating every passing moment as a gradual fading away, you are stripped of complacency, forced to plunge deeply into your current experiences with a crystalline appreciation for their fleeting nature. This acute temporal awareness perfectly sharpens your priorities, urging you to reflect on historical figures consumed by furious passions or immense tragedies. When you consider that their intense struggles have now dissolved into smoke, dust, or forgotten myths, the utter insignificance of our own fervent worldly desires becomes strikingly apparent. Friedrich Nietzsche similarly championed a triumphant approach to mortality, extensively detailing his concept of a liberated, voluntary departure. He provocatively argued that a vast majority of individuals expire far too late, while a select few vanish prematurely, advocating for the bizarre-sounding doctrine of perfectly timed dissolution. He questioned how anyone failing to act purposefully during their waking hours could possibly achieve an appropriate conclusion, ultimately suggesting that those lacking authentic direction might as well have never existed in the first place. While humanity universally acknowledges the gravity of passing, Nietzsche lamented that we have yet to transform this inevitable milestone into a celebratory festival of culmination. He envisioned an inspiring, triumphant conclusion that serves as a powerful catalyst and a hopeful pledge for the generations left behind. In this ideal scenario, the fulfilled individual departs victoriously, enveloped by companions sharing optimistic vows. Consequently, mastering the art of exiting the world should become paramount, transforming final moments into sacred ceremonies where the departing spirit passes a torch of purpose to the survivors. Through this lens, the philosopher establishes a revolutionary paradigm where your ultimate exit is a deliberate, meticulously timed choice rather than a passive accident. Your final breath ought to serve as the crowning achievement of your existence, elevated by the profound significance generated throughout your preceding journey. In stark opposition, he sharply criticized those he termed the preachers of death, highlighting a world saturated with souls whose inner vitality is so corrupted that they effectively begin decaying the moment they are born, actively seeking out philosophies of surrender and exhaustion. Because these weary individuals harbor a secret desire for oblivion, Nietzsche argued you should gladly oblige their morbid inclinations, carefully avoiding any attempt to rouse such walking coffins from their psychological slumber. Whenever these desolate figures stumble upon illness, advanced age, or a lifeless body, they eagerly seize upon the sight as definitive proof that existence itself is fundamentally flawed. He fiercely repudiated this bleak tendency to interpret physical decay or mortality as an invalidation of the human experience. Instead, he used this phenomenon to demonstrate how breathing, functioning people can actually be entirely devoid of internal life. This perspective reveals that true cessation extends far beyond the mere halting of biological functions. The true living dead are those who continuously dodge the heavy burdens of reality, seeking refuge in obsessive labor or a complete withdrawal from vital engagement. Socrates, the foundational pillar of Western philosophy, arguably exemplifies the ultimate practitioner of orchestrating an impeccably timed departure. Condemned to execution at the age of 70, his trajectory was set when the Oracle of Delphi, championing the profound maxim to know thyself, proclaimed him the wisest of all mortals. This divine endorsement launched his lifelong educational crusade, famously characterized by his ironic assertion that his only certainty was his own absolute ignorance. Earning the moniker of the Athenian gadfly, he relentlessly bombarded his fellow citizens with piercing inquiries, surgically exposing the hidden paradoxes lurking within their most cherished assumptions. His entire approach was a deliberate crusade to wield critical analysis as a weapon against stagnant traditional dogmas. Ultimately, this rigorous technique of dismantling established paradigms through relentless interrogation became eternally cemented in history as the Socratic method. According to the accounts found within Plato's Apology, the Athenian philosopher Socrates received a lethal sentence of hemlock consumption due to accusations of youth corruption and disrespect toward the local pantheon. During these legal proceedings, he famously asserted that an existence devoid of deep introspection simply holds no true value for a human being. Although the court presented him with the alternative of living out his days in exile, he firmly rejected this path, choosing instead to spend his final hours incarcerated. Throughout that last day, devoted companions visited him, presenting a viable plan for his escape, an offer he resolutely turned down to face his impending fate. As he approached the end, he delivered a cryptic final instruction to a companion, urging Crito to fulfill a lingering debt of a rooster to Asclepius, and ensuring this obligation was not ignored. Through this profound statement, The philosopher was essentially expressing profound gratitude to the deity of medicine for curing him of the ultimate ailment, known as mortal existence, using mortality itself as the remedy. For the ancient Greeks, this specific bird heralded the dawn of a new day, serving as a potent symbol of spiritual rebirth and the transition into the great beyond, making it a fitting tribute to the divine healer. Ultimately, his parting sentiment served as an expression of profound appreciation, while simultaneously gesturing toward the eternal continuation of the soul. By specifically calling upon the sole divine figure renowned for resurrecting the deceased, the visionary thinker implied that this divine force had successfully cured both him and his devoted disciples of the chaotic fever inherent to the mortal realm. Through this philosophical stance, he urges you and all his followers to diligently cleanse your inner spirits while acting with unwavering empathy toward others. Furthermore, he believed that one should commit their entire existence to fostering the overall well-being of the broader community. Shifting to a more modern psychological framework, Carl Jung posited that an individual must cultivate an equal preparedness for both the journey of life and the inevitability of passing away. He articulated that from a mental standpoint, our eventual demise holds the exact same significance as our initial arrival into the world, functioning as a fundamental component of the human experience. Speaking from his medical expertise, he noted his immense dedication to fortifying the concept of an eternal soul within his aging patients, particularly when the reality of mortality loomed uncomfortably near. From his analytical viewpoint, reaching the end of one's days is not a tragic termination, but rather an ultimate destination, with our natural trajectory shifting toward this conclusion the moment we cross the midpoint of our lifespan. The foundation of this renowned psychoanalyst's theoretical framework relies heavily upon the presence of opposing mental forces residing deeply within the human mind. He heavily emphasized the critical necessity of maintaining a balanced tension between these conflicting internal elements to achieve true psychological harmony. Since our final breath is an unavoidable reality, subscribing to any other belief forces you into a state of profound self-deception, ultimately causing you to operate in direct opposition to your most fundamental biological drives. Consequently, he strongly condemned modern society for its incredibly skewed perspective on this duality, pointing out our obsessive fixation on the waking world while we simultaneously attempt to erase the concept of mortality from our collective consciousness. To counteract this imbalance, he advises you to actively ready yourself for the profound changes that accompany the latter half of your journey. This raises the profound question of exactly how you ought to confront your own mortality as the years inevitably advance. The Swiss psychiatrist argued that the end of life becomes a matter of supreme fascination for the elderly, presenting them with a definitive existential challenge that absolutely demands a personal response. Because pure logic offers nothing beyond the terrifying vision of a dark, impending abyss, he suggested that a person must cultivate a personal mythology surrounding their passing to navigate this transition. These personal narratives possess the unique power to manifest comforting and spiritually enriching visions of existence beyond the veil, providing solace where rationality fails entirely. Whether you choose to fully embrace these spiritual concepts or merely entertain them slightly, your level of correctness remains identical to those who reject such notions completely. Yet, while the cynical individual trudges miserably toward an empty void, the person who trusts in these ancient archetypes aligns with the natural flow of existence, carrying their vitality straight across the threshold. While both individuals undoubtedly face the vast unknown, the skeptic fights their intrinsic nature, whereas the believer harmonizes flawlessly with their deepest evolutionary instincts. Such a sustaining mythology is never constructed through cold, calculating logic, but is instead organically discovered by carefully monitoring your own internal psychological landscape. You tap into this profound wisdom by engaging in dynamic visualization, analyzing your nocturnal visions, trusting sudden intuitive leaps, and recognizing the profound significance hidden within seemingly random coincidences. This continuous, lifelong journey toward psychological wholeness, known as individuation, gradually pulls hidden elements from the shadows of the unconscious directly into the glaring light of awareness. By undertaking this transformative work, you successfully realign your internal compass, transitioning the primary center of your identity away from the fragile ego and anchoring it firmly within the true self. The analyst later documented a series of profound hallucinations he endured in the immediate aftermath of a severe brush with mortality. While hovering precipitously close to the end, he visualized his consciousness floating far above the earth, eventually spotting a massive, solitary chunk of granite suspended in the cosmic void that housed an ancient sanctuary. As he drew nearer to the entryway of this celestial structure, he underwent a deeply surreal transformation, suddenly realizing with absolute conviction that his entire being was entirely composed of his own accumulated historical timeline. This bizarre sensation simultaneously filled him with an overwhelming sense of profound emptiness and an indescribable feeling of absolute completeness. Stripped of all earthly desires and physical cravings, he found himself existing purely objectively, manifesting solely as the sum total of his past experiences. Although an initial wave of absolute destruction and loss washed over him, this temporary despair rapidly vanished into insignificance as the concept of the past dissolved. He felt absolutely no sorrow for the worldly attachments he had shed, realizing instead that he currently possessed the absolute totality of his essence, which proved to be infinitely sufficient. Approaching the sacred structure, he felt an unshakable confidence that crossing its threshold would lead him into a brilliantly lit chamber filled with the kindred souls to whom he truly belonged in the broader cosmic sense. Within those hallowed walls, he anticipated finally grasping the intricate historical tapestry into which his specific thread had been woven. He expected to finally comprehend the ultimate purpose behind his earthly manifestation and clearly perceive the final destination of his spiritual current. However, this profound revelation was abruptly interrupted when a manifestation of his earthly physician materialized, informing him that he was strictly obligated to descend back to the mortal realm, causing the transcendent imagery to instantly evaporate. When contrasted against the boundless liberation he had tasted among the stars, resuming his physical existence felt remarkably akin to being locked inside a restrictive, suffocating penitentiary. Throughout the daylight hours, the doctor wrestled with profound melancholy, but the arrival of darkness consistently ushered him into a state of rapturous joy, immersing him in nocturnal reveries that introduced an atmosphere of indescribable divine presence into his very quarters. He described this ethereal manifestation as the ultimate mystical union of opposing forces, a concept that would profoundly influence the remainder of his days. In fact, he dedicated his final comprehensive manuscript, titled Mysterium Coniunctionis, entirely to this subject, finishing the monumental exploration of alchemical and psychological synthesis during his 81st year. He proclaimed that this specific volume finally anchored his psychological theories firmly within objective reality, cementing his life's mission as a cohesive, historical achievement. Upon reaching this intellectual summit, he felt he had exhausted every possible avenue of scientific exploration available to his mortal mind. He had successfully touched the very core of the transcendent archetype, reaching a definitive boundary past which empirical language simply could not convey the profound depths of the human spirit. Reflecting upon these extraordinary occurrences several years down the line, the visionary thinker confessed the sheer impossibility of accurately communicating the breathtaking beauty and overwhelming emotional intensity he had encountered. He categorized these profound glimpses beyond the veil as the most monumental events of his entire existence, adamantly denying that they were merely the fabrications of an overactive, feverish mind. Instead, he maintained that these cosmic encounters possessed an undeniable authenticity devoid of any personal bias or internal projection. To him, these glimpses into the eternal realm carried a distinct signature of unshakable, absolute reality, confirming the enduring power of the unseen forces shaping our universe.